Summer camp turns into a summer nightmare when the Vanguard action squad of the League of Villains make their terrifying debut. Strap yourselves in, ladies and gentlemen. Things are about to get really intense during the summer training camp arc. This was a really great build-up episode right here to the introduction of the Vanguard Action Squad of the League of Villains, a group of very, very creepy individuals who decide to invade the training camp at the end of this episode, and they all look incredibly awesome. That being said, this episode right here was action-packed and downright hilarious. One of the funniest episodes that I've seen from the entire series, which, if you've become attached to these characters at this point, I think you're going to get a lot of really great laughs out of this one right here. What I especially love about this episode, though, is that Class A and Class B are actually going to be training together, which I think is great because Class B has a lot of really awesome characters, and now that I've finally gotten used to all of the main characters from Class A, I'm very interested to learn about them. But for the most part, they do take a backseat in this episode. They're just there to sort of witness all the crazy training that Class A is going through, and of course reluctantly realizing that they're going to be joining them very soon. But the first half of this episode is basically dedicated to each individual student's training, which I really loved. I do love that they are actually managing to expand on every single character, and the training that they actually go through is equal parts hilarious and also just, it makes sense when you actually do think about how their powers work. So let's break down the individual training that these characters are doing. Yuga has his naval laser, and his biggest problem is that he's never able to fire it continuously, so he is going to train his body to do so, where he constantly launches them up into the air, and it's definitely taking a toll on him, to the point where he constantly has to go to the bathroom, which must absolutely suck. Mina, of course, is doing something similar where she's continuously having to create acid from her body in order to toughen herself up. You also have Kyoka, who has her earjack ability, and weirdly enough, she's toughening up her ears by continuously punching against a giant boulder. Not with her fists, but with her weird earjack things. It's crazy. Suyu, the frog girl, is also having to climb up a mountain just with the power of her tongue. It's easily her most distinguishing characteristic, so of course she has to toughen it accordingly. Same thing for Ochako as well. She has to continuously move around in anti-gravity so that she can get used to all of the centrifugal force, as well as allowing her to continue to levitate objects and move them much more freely. Tenya's training is very simple but very funny how it's used visually in this episode. Basically, he's just doing laps. He's running and making sure to increase his stride with every single move. But what's really funny is that since he's so fast, of course, you see him sort of like photobombing every single shot in this entire episode with him constantly running around, and it always manages to get a chuckle out of me. I do like that some of the students are working together, like Mashirao with the massive tail is actually battling against Eijiro, where they're both actually just sort of strengthening up their overall abilities, with Eijiro continuing to use his armored form, and Mashirao just becoming stronger in general. Denki is infusing his electricity into a massive battery, which is allowing him to become even stronger and being able to use it for a much longer amount of time, and it's also just an excuse to see him just completely screaming and struggling, which is really funny with his distinctive face, which seems to get smaller every single time. Koji's training is especially funny because since he's only able to talk to animals, basically his entire training revolves around him coming out of his shell to the point where he has to go up to the top of a cliff and just continuously scream. Now, this is just funny on its own, but I love how it's used visually in this episode. Like when they wake up one morning, the first thing you see is Koji screaming into the air. Basically, he's the rooster of the team. Rikido and Momo actually have very similar training where they're supposed to continuously eat while utilizing a special ability, with Rikido constantly eating sweets and working out at the same time. Basically, keep throwing the coal into the oven and the train's gonna keep moving. Then you have Momo, who is continuously creating things while eating at the same time, and basically we get to learn that the more she eats, the more she can produce. According to Hanta, that's basically the same thing as taking a crap. Speaking of Hanta, of course, he is doing his tape training, but like the other characters, he has to continuously use it. And there's a great shot of him on a cliff's edge, constantly firing the tape from his elbows, just screaming in midair while it happens. It's just a really overall funny image. Mezzo and Toru are also training together, another very interesting pair, with Mezzo continuing to use his very weird quirk to try and find Toru, who's trying to stay as hidden as possible, which that's something that she's very good at given her track record in the series thus far. Fumikage is another standout of this episode, not for the actual training he does, but for how much he's actually enjoying his training. He has to go into a dark space so that he can actually control Dark Shadow when it goes completely berserk, and he refers to it as his dark revelry, and throughout the episode, that's like the only thing that he says. He ends up saying this continuously, and it's always played to really funny effect, mostly the way that people actually react to it, because how incredibly dark and metal it sounds. But at the end of the episode, when Class A is training with B, he gets into it even more, as they have a training exercise where they're supposed to walk through the woods and scare each other. This is something that Fumikage is going to be perfect at. It's his dark revelry, if you will. Shoto Todoroki is constantly having to switch between his fire and ice abilities, but not just using them normally. He's actually sitting in a massive tub of water, and he's continuously freezing it and heating it up constantly, which has got to be an amazing shock to his body, but it's also allowing him to be able to switch between these two abilities that much quicker on the fly and utilize their most strongest qualities. Minetta's training is that he's removing his balls. In all seriousness, no, he's removing the balls from his head to the point where he's going to be able to do this without constantly bleeding out, which is a pretty big weakness when you actually think about it. Katsuki Bakugo's training is definitely some of my favorite in this episode, as he has to dip his hands into boiling water, which will increase his sweat, allowing him to continuously fire off blasts and make them stronger each and every time. What's funny about his training, though, is his constant cursing and screaming out, "damn it all." It's made the even better effect when they decide to introduce the other members of the Wild Pussycats in this episode. Yes, the other two members finally appear, and they are insane. One of them is another female member who's very spunky like Pixie Bob, and she goes by the name of Ragdoll. She has the ability to basically keep tabs on up to 100 people at a time as long as she can see them. She's like the reconnaissance person. And then, of course, there is Tiger, or Tora, who is the odd man out, to say the least, in the group, as unlike the other members, he's not female, and he's just this super jacked dude wearing a skirt and dressed like a freaking anime idol cat. His ability allows him to make his body incredibly pliable, where he can move around and flatten it, which is perfect for people who are doing strength training, which brings us to Deku, who is going to be training with him personally and getting beat up all at the same time, while also freaking out the other people who have similar quirks and abilities, knowing that they're going to have to go up against this very creepy hulking cat man. So yes, most of this episode is dedicated to training, but what I do love about it is how inventive it is, and how it's not just them going to the gym. That's always been my favorite thing about My Hero Academia. All the training sequences are always just really fun to watch. I mean, honestly, I can't wait to see what's going to happen in the show when these students eventually do graduate from the school and we get to see them as adults and heroes, if that even happens. But right now, the cornerstone of the series is about being a young student, and it makes sense that we would get scenes like this. But we still get some other good supplementary material this week. Aside from their hardcore training, they also have to actually feed themselves. They have to work together as a unit and actually cook food with one another, which also leads to tons of hilarity, especially with Tenya acting as sort of like the surrogate leader for both Class A and B. And then, of course, there's Kota. And man, I was afraid that Kota was going to be a complete downer and just destroy this episode. It was going to be all about him, his backstory, how tragic it was. And no, it's only a very small part of this episode, with Deku continuously trying to get close to him and trying to understand why he truly hates heroes. But he pretty much hates everyone with a quirk. Heroes, villains, he hates the fact that they fight and kill each other and cause all sorts of chaos, and honestly, he makes a good point. While heroes are incredibly impressive and awesome looking, they cause a lot of collateral damage, which results in the deaths of really important people, like Kota's parents. But it's also very obvious that he has some sort of special quirk himself, as they sort of allude to that in this episode by showing that this little hiding space that he goes to, he used his quirk on a wall, and it looks like it destroyed it in some way or created some sort of impact. I'm not sure why this is, but it looks like he is going to be an important character, but thankfully it's not dragging down the entire episode. And the cherry on top, of course, of this episode is that we get the League of Villains. They finally appear in this episode. We even get to see some of their signature abilities. And these guys are crazy. They all have some of the coolest designs that I've seen from some of the villains in the show. We do get to see the headliners like Himiko Toga returning, as well as Dabi. Himiko is wearing her signature Bane mask, which honestly looks really awesome. She doesn't like it, though. We have Dabi, who, very much like Shoto Todoroki in Endeavor, seems to use some sort of fire ability, but his is a blue fire, which of course means that it's incredibly hot and powerful, but it has a really great visual flair with his overall zombie-fied appearance. The other members of the League of Villains, we don't really get to learn their names yet, but they all have really crazy designs, ranging from a young Japanese high school student who wears a gas mask to a dude who appears to have psychic abilities, and some sort of lizard man who is dressed like Hero Killer Stain, which kind of makes him look like a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. And there's a weird BDSM guy, a giant guy in a cloak. There are just a ton of really creepy adversaries, and when they appear at the end of the episode, they immediately begin to attack and separate the teachers from the students, as well as sort of freaking out everyone in general. And I cannot wait to see the confrontations these characters are going to have with these guys, who they're going to fight, and what ultimately is going to be left of them. The hype is real, to say the least. So what's the rundown on this episode of My Hero Academia? In my honest opinion, this was just another perfect episode. All the moments with the students were really fantastic. Their individual training was really fun to watch. And there were some visual jokes in this episode which honestly made me laugh out loud. I especially loved when we got all of the Wild Wild Pussycats together and they got to do their big pose. And as soon as they finished posing, Katsuki Bakugo just unleashes a massive explosion behind them, which is such a great play on the fact that when Super Sentai teams come together and do a pose, there's always this random explosion. But it's made even better by the fact that when he does this, he just starts screaming, "Damn it!" That and Koji screaming like a rooster is probably one of my favorite funny jokes from this episode. But yeah, the training was really intense here. Class B getting involved is also really, really good. I love that. I just want to see more of those characters because they seem honestly just as interesting. I love that they finally get to join them in on the training. They don't get to do much in the episode, which is kind of a disappointment, but at the end, through the big training exercise where they have to go through the woods and try and scare each other, it's just ridiculous. And, you know, that doesn't even go on long. As soon as it starts, that's when the League of Villains come in and they just immediately start to shake everything up. And their visual designs alone make this really entertaining for just how crazy they truly are. The Pussycats also realize that this is not good that these guys have shown up. They realize the seriousness of the situation, and considering there's so few heroes that are actually at the training camp, it's really going to be up to the students to actually fight against these guys, which I cannot wait to see. The hype is beyond real at this point, and just the fact that some of my favorite characters are going to be up against some of these really powerful characters is kind of disturbing. Like, Himiko is actually watching Ochako and Tsuyu, which I think is really creepy. It looks like they're probably going to have a confrontation. I can't wait to see who Deku's going to go up against. It's probably going to be that guy, though, from the intro who has the muscles all over his body. That could actually be the guy who is wearing the cloak, and it makes sense because it looks like he's going after Kota. Deku's probably going to end up saving him, and of course they're going to have a much better understanding of one another, and maybe even Kota will warm up to the idea of people with quirks. That's kind of where I do see this going, and I don't know how All For One's going to factor into this, but every time I see him in the intro as he's about to fight All Might, I swear I feel like I can lift a mountain. It's just such a great scene. I really love how intense things are actually getting and how they're shaking this up. What could have been a normal training arc has transformed into the next major arc of the series, and it's a good thing to see. Production value-wise, another awesome-looking episode. This is just a great-looking series, which has some very sharp and distinctive character design, and it makes it so that you can get attached to at least one person or maybe even all of them. It's very clean-looking. It was funny, it was action-packed, and it had a great cliffhanger ending. I loved this episode of My Hero Academia, which is why I'm going to give this episode a 5 out of 5. Check it out, My Hero fans. I would love to hear your thoughts about it, and if you did watch the episode, tell me all of them in the comment section below. What was your favorite training sequence from this episode? Do you have a favorite character from Class A or B? And what did you think of the appearances of the villains in this episode? Do you have a favorite one so far? What do you hope to see from the rest of the summer training camp arc in My Hero Academia? Let's start a discussion, guys. Thank you very much for watching this review. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, stay down, baby.